You're listening to nativetalk.net. Audio files are available online at nativetalk.net, where you can download and listen anytime on your computer, mobile device, or join us live every week where you may have already won $10 million. Be a part of the program by emailing us, podcast@nativetalk.net. And now, your hosts, Cliff and Brandon. Yep, that's what you're listening to. Now grab your nets and let's go fishing.
Good morning and welcome to the nativetalk.net radio program. Brandon can't be with us because he's busy moving all of his stuff to Washington State. You know, I got Danelle Reed with me, though. Have you ever moved from one place to another, like a whole other city?
I have moved, yes. For graduate school, I moved from Tacoma to our sister city, Boston, drove the whole way. And so, yes, I can totally appreciate what that move is like. And then I've also lived in South Dakota for grad school, Nashville, Tennessee for postdoc, and then Portland, Oregon for some time with Indian Health Service. So I know moving trucks.
Now, did you move just by yourself or like with your whole family?
Oh, my the first year I moved by myself. The first year away for graduate school, I was alone and kind of went on my just by my lonesome. And then after that, my fiance joined me, and he continued and started graduate school with me. And then when I was in Boston, actually, Annette Bryan, who's one of our tribal council members.
That's your sister, isn't it?
That's my older sister. She also moved to Boston with me, and we completed graduate school together. So that was kind of fun.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I can definitely attest to the fact that moving by yourself is far easier than moving with your family. I lived in Russia for 5 years, and when I went there, I was single. And it wasn't that hard. But when I moved back, I had a wife and a son.
Oh, yeah.
And moving with the family was a lot tougher than by myself.
Oh yeah, that it's each number that goes up in terms of the move exponentially changes what you're moving.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to start today with gun control, and I have I created a gun theme. So let's see how this works.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. I shot the sheriff, I did not shoot the deputy. Just killed a man. Put a gun against his head, pulled my trigger, now he's dead. Jimmy got a gun. Don't take your guns to town.
So we're talking about guns. Now that's a big topic these days, isn't it? So what is going on with all of the violence? Everything that I'm reading these days shows that violent crime in America overall is going down, but it seems like guns and gun violence and these mass shootings are more prevalent than ever. It's all over the place. And so why, as a culture and as a country, are we getting better at controlling ourselves, and violence, is only going down? And yet the horrific events seem to be going up. That's something I don't get. I don't understand it.
Well, I mean, I think that's a tough one, and I know that this is an extremely impassioned topic for a lot of folks. I think the minute we start to talk about guns and managing guns or what's going on with guns, is a lot of folks will want to lean on the Second Amendment and say you can't take them away. And I am definitely not fighting that amendment. I think, as American citizens, we're entitled to every one of those amendments, and they're there for a reason. But I do think that the statisticians and all the experts out there who are crunching numbers will say that America across the globe has the most liberal gun laws, across the board. so compared to any other country, we tend to hand guns out, and and we hand out as many as, so if I wanted to be a gun owner, I could own 1,000 of them, or I could own, and how am I going to manage 1,000 guns? And I know that a lot of people own multiple guns, and you have to be responsible for every single one of them. So, I think we are in a place where we have people owning guns who maybe shouldn't own guns.
If there's any doubt about that.
Right, who shouldn't, because they can't control or manage them due to a lack of skills or lack of resources to like put them in a gun lock. You and I talked about, the expense of a gun lock in a conversation recently. They're very expensive, like a gun safe, I think is what they're called, right?
Yeah, I've always, I own multiple guns myself. And I've always had a safe for my handguns, because I think that those are probably the most ripe for abuse. They're so easy to handle. You can just pick it up, and we'll talk about suicide later. But I got to think that pistols are probably the most used for that. And I had never had one for rifles, because you have to have a larger safe, a way to control those. And because I've got children in my house, as they're getting a little bit older, my oldest is he's 6 years old. I thought it was important to get a gun safe for my rifles as well. But you do have to be responsible for every firearm that you own, because it's your home and it's your property, and you have to be responsible for what people do. If your child steals your gun, I'm sorry, not your gun, your vehicle, your car, and they go crash it into something, as a parent, you're responsible for that, And so I kind of feel the same way about firearms.
I agree. I think the problem is the laws aren't following that logic. And so, where we have, and the same thing with, car safety is around DUIs. And we used to, in our lifetimes when I was younger, you could drink and drive, and there were no laws that said that wasn't okay.
Or at least they weren't enforced.
Well, there actually weren't the laws. About 4 or 5 decades, a lot of states did not have laws on the books to say that you cannot drink, alcohol and drive. When we started seeing an accelerated rate of DUIs and people, and homicides due to, car death by a driver under the influence, the state started getting in line and making those laws. So we need the laws to catch up with the number of gun deaths that we're seeing. And it's not happening.
I completely agree with that. I think,
we have powerful lobbyists that fight that. Very logical next step is what I see needs to happen.
Well, and I'm not opposed to controls and laws that make sense, because the problem that I have, and what a lot of other folks have, is that whenever something happens, they start proposing laws and things that really wouldn't change anything. Because when you ban guns in general, the crazy people, the criminals, the people who want to hurt other folks can always find another way to accomplish their goals. You've got, in Washington, D.C., what a lot of people pointed out was they banned, or they had incredibly strict gun laws enacted in 1974. And every gun had to be registered. No new guns could be purchased. And a lot of people point out that violent crime shot up. But when you look at the whole statistics, what you see is it wasn't so cut and dried as ban guns, violence goes up, because violence goes up and down all the time. And what it really looks like is it didn't have much of an effect at all, because the people who aren't following rules still ain't following rules. And then you've got countries like Australia or Russia or England who have virtually banned guns completely, and yet the murder rates and violent crime and stuff like that is still very high. Gun deaths and gun violence is very, very low, but people are still finding a way to commit crimes and assaults and all that other kind of stuff. So banning guns doesn't necessarily stop crime. So is there something that we can do to stop people? I think there is. I think that we definitely need to protect our children, for goodness sakes. You don't see any gun crime happening at courthouses because everybody is, there. You can't walk in with a knife or a gun or anything. We protect our criminals, but we can't protect our children. I mean, that's ridiculous in my opinion. You know?
I think that's a really good point, and we protect the people going into courthouses by using metal detectors, right? So that they can screen for those weapons coming in that are dangerous. Mm-hmm. And a lot of schools have done that. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. So when gang violence was at its height in the late 1980s, early 90s, and gangs were, that was like, rappers were rapping about it and they were in it, and and there were a lot of deaths due to gang violence. Communities where they tended to be their hub, like Harlem and East LA and the like, those schools put in gun detectors or weapon detectors, right, at their front doors back then. So decades ago.
As well, they should.
Children, because the guns were in their communities. So today, when we're hearing about these shootings in schools, they're not happening in the hood or in the ghettos where there still is, relative, the gang violence is still happening. I'm not saying it's ended, but our children in those neighborhoods aren't dying from these mass shootings in schools because they've protected their children. They're happening in upper middle class, affluent neighborhoods where, unfortunately, in those systems, they think that they are immune to, these devastating incidents where people are coming in and they're, killing multiple children in schools. It's just the saddest, expression of people suffering is that they're going to go in and cause so much hurt and harm to young people. But, again, pointing to the neighborhoods and that did it right, when it became an issue of too many guns in their neighborhood, they protected their kids first. And right. So I definitely,
it's the most important.
I would advocate for that to happen in our community. We have our own tribal school, and I would be the first to vote to put in some protections on that campus for our children.
Man, it's insane to me that we protect these public buildings so well, but have been ignoring our schools. Now I understand in the past, I mean, I grew up in a world where this kind of stuff just didn't happen. I grew up in Sacramento, California. Now there, because of the California weather, we don't have these schools that are like standalone buildings. They're designed where you can kind of like walk around, and they've got open air hallways and grass in the middle. So in some schools, it's probably going to be really difficult to secure, but we never had to worry about this kind of stuff. And then, with Columbine in 99 and, since then, it's just gotten ridiculously out of hand. And I don't know, something has to be figured out to protect our children, because they are in public buildings. And as far as I'm concerned, the cost is a non-issue. You got to spend whatever you need to spend to make it happen.
I agree 100% on that.
So, but I find it very comforting, and I like seeing the fact that overall violent crime is down. It seems like society is going in the right direction, except in this case. So, keeping violent weapons out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, I think, is something that we need to get better at and figure out what's going on. Because, right now, we don't really know how to do that. But, with time, I think we got to figure it out. But, to the folks who say, like, let's ban guns completely, I don't think that's going to stop violent crime or crazy people, because you can always go out and build a pipe bomb. You can find online how to build a pipe bomb today. I've been redoing my basement, and I've got these concrete walls. And so I have to attach like plywood and stuff to the concrete. And so I basically have a gun that shoots a nail into the concrete. You modify that and, now I got a nail gun, or there's like 1,000 different weapons out there.
Sure. I mean, yeah.
you can use.
You can weaponize anything. You can weaponize a toothbrush. I mean, they do that in prisons. So, I mean, so the most...
or in England, where they're having an epidemic of knife violence, more murders by knives there than they've ever had before. It's ridiculous.
I didn't know that. That's sad.
Yeah, they're trying to say ban knives now, anything in public, because they're being used so often to commit these crimes. And I think it's in London, the mayor of London, who's saying there's no good reason why anybody should need a knife, except at home, things like that. And so, you ban one thing and people are going to find something else, but that doesn't mean that we should do nothing,
I totally agree. Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I noticed when I was reading is that 62% of firearm death, and as you're looking, you're going to find a lot of statistics about deaths by firearm. But, the interesting thing is 62% of those are suicides.
Yeah.
So people aren't in overwhelming numbers like shooting each other up in the streets. It's just not happening. But they are shooting themselves. And suicide is something that, well, for me, I've always had a hard time understanding why somebody would decide to end their own life. But we're going to talk about that in just a second. Right.
All right.
A quick break here on the nativetalk.net radio.
Sounds good.
Always remember, animals are your friends, but they still won't pick you up at the airport. The nativetalk.net radio program with Cliff and Brandon. Now grab your nets and let's go fishing.
Hey, this is Steve with thepeoplesammo.com. Do you enjoy the outdoors?